morning, everyone. My name is Kelly LeGrand-Wiener. I'm the managing attorney at Scott Legal. Today, we are here to talk about the H-1B visa and its rules and requirements. In particular, we'll be talking about kind of the H-1B visa application process and the H-1B lottery that is coming up very quickly. We'll go over the registration process, the labor condition certification process, and the education and job requirements for the H-1B. Before we get started, a few things that we want to mention. So one is that Scott Legal is a full service immigration firm. We process H-1Bs regularly, and we also regularly process, H-1Bs that are entered into the lottery each year. We will continue our webinar series, doing at least 2 webinars a month on various different topics. And at the end of this webinar, you'll get a few things. One is a PowerPoint on the H-1B visa. Another is a free comprehensive guide going over the requirements for the H-1B visa, and also a link to where you can sign up for additional webinars. For our panelists today, we're lucky to have Michaela Vrazdova, who is a senior associate at Scott Legal and has vast experience processing H-1B visas, and particularly significant experience with the H-1B registration system, which in recent years changed, to be a fully electronic process. My name is Kelly LeGrand-Wiener. As I mentioned, I'm the managing attorney at Scott Legal and also have significant experience processing H-1B visas. As we go through the presentation, if you have questions, please send them through the chat box, and we will, save some time at the end of the presentation for questions. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on demand. As we get started, I'll just, start off by asking Michaela, so how many H-1B petitions can be adjudicated each year, and how many registrations are submitted each year? So why do we have this lottery?
Thanks, Kelly, and good morning, everyone. Yes, so total of 85,000 H-1B petitions can be adjudicated every year, but each year like a lot of more people apply and file the H-1B registrations. So, for example, last year around 480,000 registrations were filed. So that's why the government created this random selection lottery system. They run the lottery system and randomly select total of 85,000 H-1B registrations, and these registration can then be adjudicated by USCIS.
Perfect. And so could you explain for us, how does the H-1B lottery work? What are the important dates? How is the registration submitted? And when will employers know whether they were selected?
Yeah, so the H-1B lottery is run every year in March. So this year it's the same. So the lottery system will or the H-1B registration system will open on March 1st at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and will close on March 17. So during this period from March 1st to March 17, the US companies that would like to sponsor employees for an H-1B visa, or immigration attorneys filing this H-1B registration on behalf of the companies, will have to submit the H-1B registration during this period. And then on March 17, the system will close, and then USCIS will run the lottery. And the USCIS previously said that they plan to notify the companies whose registrations were selected by March 31st. So by March 31st this year, the companies should know whether or not they will be able to file the H-1B petitions for the employees.
Perfect. And so what information needs to be included in this H-1B registration?
Yeah, so in the H-1B registration, the company will need to put, or an attorney on behalf of a company will need to input information such as just kind of basic information about the company, such as the company's name, address, employer identification number, and information about the person who is kind of filing this H-1B registration. So the person has to be an authorized signatory of the company. And then we will also need to input some information about the employee, such as the employee's name, date of birth, country of birth, country of nationality, passport number. And then one important kind of information that will need to be input about the employee is whether or not kind of the employee is applying under the U.S. Masters cap. So there is a special from the total of 85,000 H-1Bs that can be adjudicated every year. 20,000 of those are kind of reserved for people who have a master's degree from U.S. universities. So that's why this information needs to be input in the registration. So, the system will know whether or not the registration should run through the U.S. Masters lottery as well.
Sorry about that. So, perfect. So what if you have an employee who wants to file a registration? They're interested in an H-1B. Can an employee just file a registration for themselves?
Yeah, so that's unfortunately not possible. So if you are, if you're interested in the H-1B visa, you need to find a company in the US that will sponsor you for for the H-1B visa, or they'll be able to file the H-1B registration for you. As I mentioned, in the USCIS online system, there has to be input certain information about the company, so you would not be even able to kind of like file the registration. And yeah, even if you find a company, the company or an authorized signatory of the company has to file the registration, and you as the employee or a prospective employee cannot file the registration.
Perfect. So, so I know you mentioned kind of the U.S. Masters cap. So do applicants who have U.S. degrees have an advantage in this H-1B lottery system?
Yes. So as I mentioned, so there are 65,000 kind of spots kind of for for everyone. If you have a bachelor's, if you have a master's from a foreign university, in that case, your registration will go through kind of the standard 65,000 lottery. But if you have a master's degree from a US university, your registration will first go through the regular 65,000 lottery. And even if it's not selected, then it will go through the special 20,000 kind of lottery reserved for people who have a master's degree from US university. So you will have an advantage because your registration will basically kind of go through two separate lotteries. So you will have a higher chance to be selected.
Perfect. And so do you have to have a US degree to qualify for an H-1B? And if you don't, how can you prove that kind of your degree from outside the US will qualify?
Yeah, so you do not have to have a degree from a US university. That's not a requirement. But if you have a degree from a foreign university and your H-1B registration is selected, you will need to get a credentials evaluation. There are special kind of companies that can do this for you. They will look at the degree, they will look at the transcripts, they will look at the courses you took, and then they will kind of evaluate whether your foreign degree is equivalent to a US degree. And so they would want to conclude, or you would want them to conclude that your degree is equivalent to at least a US bachelor's degree, because that's a requirement for an H-1B visa, is that you have to have at least a bachelor's degree in your field.
And what about experience? Can you qualify with just experience?
So yes, so you can, but it's not that common. So I would say that in majority of cases, people qualify through the bachelor's degree or through the master's degree. You can qualify through the experience, but you would have to show that you have this progressive experience in your field, and you would have to get letters from all your kind of previous employers, describing in detail, what kind of work you did for them. So it's just kind of like a much more complicated process. And yeah, I would say that the majority of the H-1B petitions, the applicants qualify based on the education.
Perfect. And so you go through this registration process, you submit online, and then you find out you're selected in the lottery. So does this mean that your H-1B is approved?
No. So if you find out by March 31st that or the company finds out that the H-1B registration was selected, that just means that the company will be able to file an H-1B petition. And in that petition, because in the registration, really the company doesn't submit, like a lot of information about the job, about the qualification. It's just really basic information. So in the H-1B petition itself, the company will need to submit things like a job description describing, what will be the position in the US. They will need to submit the actual kind of qualifications of the employee. They will need to submit labor condition application that is certified by the Department of Labor. So the selection in the lottery really just gives the company a chance to file the H-1B petition. And then USCIS will make a decision on the H-1B petition whether they are approving it or not.
Perfect. Thank you. So I think we're going to switch gears a bit. And I think there were some questions that you were going to ask me.
Yeah. What is kind of so let's say that the H-1B registration is selected in the lottery. When does the US company have to file the H-1B petition?
Right. So we know that, selection in the lottery is great, but does not mean you're approved. So if you are selected, then what you need to do is you need to file your H-1B petition with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services within 90 days. So usually they open that around April 1st, and then it needs to be submitted, by the end of June. And so during that time, that's when you are, preparing the actual substance of the H-1B petition. You're filing your labor condition application with the Department of Labor. That's usually certified within 7 business days. You're preparing your, your employer letter. You're preparing your proof that the person has the degree, and all the other elements of your H-1B petition, and then you're filing that within 90 days. If you can't miss that window, that's very, very important. It really needs to be within that timeline. Everything with the lottery, with H-1Bs, really is so time sensitive. There's really not room for kind of an error or rejection because you really just get this one chance each year.
And Kelly, let's say that the H-1B petition is approved, for example, like in May, June. What is the earliest kind of start date the employee can start working for the company based on the H-1B status?
Sure. So if you're selected in the lottery and this is your first year, and then your petition's adjudicated and approved, the earliest start date is October 1st of that year. So even if you're approved in May or June, you cannot start working on H-1B status until October 1st at the earliest.
And what are the H-1B filing fees, and can the employee pay any of these filing fees?
Sure. So the H-1B is a very heavily regulated visa, which means it comes along with some very specific filing fees. So there's a basic filing fee of $460 at the time of this webinar for Form I-129. And then there's some supplementary fees you have to pay, a $500 anti-fraud fee, and then a either $750 or $1,500 fee for the American Competitiveness Workforce Act. If the company is kind of H-1B dependent, there may be some additional fees, but generally the employer is required to pay all of these fees. The employee should not be paying the fees. The certain fees that the employee can potentially pay for are the premium processing fee. So there's a $2,500 premium processing fee that is not a requirement at all, but so the employee can pay for that if they want to. And then similarly, if you're doing an application for dependents, so let's say you have your spouse and child under 21 and they want to get H-4 visas, you can pay for, or the employee can pay for those applications. But when it comes to the actual USCIS filing fees, the employee should not be paying, the employer should be paying those.
And Kelly, do all kind of companies or U.S. employers have to go through the lottery system, through the H-1B registration process, or are there any kind of categories of employers that don't have to go through the lottery system?
Sure. So there are employers who get to skip the lottery system. These are what's known as cap exempt employers. So a cap exempt employer is, what it sounds like. You're exempt from the cap. You can go beyond that 85,000 slots that are allocated each year. However, to qualify for this, you have to meet certain requirements. So you have to either be an institution of higher education or a related or affiliated nonprofit entity, or a nonprofit organization or governmental research organization. So, those particular employers get a special benefit of being able to apply for an H-1B, for an employee at really any time of the year. They're not subject to this lottery. So it's definitely worth, as a potential applicant, possibly looking for these types of employers to see if, if you weren't selected in the lottery, maybe you have another option for this type of cap exempt employer to sponsor you.
And Kelly, let's say that someone is here on F1 OPT, and a company sponsors this person for an H-1B, and let's say that the H-1B petition is approved, and let's say that the employees OPT expires, for example, like in July or August. You said that the earliest start date for the H-1B is October 1st. So what happens in the period, like once the OPT expires and before the person can start working on the H-1B?
Sure. So, so there is something called kind of the cap gap, which basically allows students to extend their F1 status while they wait for this October 1st start date for the H-1B. So you're eligible for this cap gap benefit as long as you're maintaining F1 status on the date your H-1B petition is filed. So let's say, you're like in your example, your OPT doesn't end until, July or August. So in this case, let's say you file your H-1B sometime in May, and it gets approved. So this allows you to keep working up until September 30th, and then on October 1st, you would change your status into H-1B, assuming you filed a change of status petition. So this cap gap benefit is only available for people that have filed as a change of status. If you're in the situation where your H-1B petition was filed and let's say you were in your 60-day grace period, but your OPT is not valid anymore, then the benefit you get is you can stay in the United States. You're considered to be maintaining your F1 status until you get the H-1B on October 1st. But if your OPT expired before you filed your H-1B petition, then unfortunately your work authorization is not extended. So for some people, they are able to kind of keep working the entire time up until they change status to H-1B. For others, depending on the timeline of their OPT ending, they may only be able to stay and work. And then for those, unfortunately, if your F1 status, fully ended and your grace period ended before the H-1B petition is filed, then you don't have an ability to stay. Then you would need to, depart the U.S. or, do something different, discuss your options with your immigration attorney. And then you would be able to return, get an H-1B visa and return to start work on October 1st.
Thank you. And Kelly, you mentioned that the H-1B is a very highly regulated visa. Is there any specific wage that needs to be paid to the employee? Like, is this regulated as well?
It is, yes. So the employer is required to pay the higher of the actual or prevailing wage. So the prevailing wage, when you file your labor condition application, that's part of what's, on that labor condition application is what the prevailing wage is based on usually the employment statistics for, similar, jobs or the job classification in the area where the person is going to be working. So let's say that if a company, actually pays, the same or similarly situated employees a certain wage, and that's higher than the prevailing wage, then that's the wage that will need to be paid. If there are no similarly situated employees or no same employees in that same role, then they would have to pay at least the prevailing wage. So that is very important that the company is prepared to pay that.
And Kelly, let's say that the employee is not selected in the H-1B lottery. What other visa options does the employee have to stay in the US?
Sure. So, unfortunately, because of all the numbers we kind of talked about, there's usually a pretty high percentage chance that you're not selected in the H-1B lottery. So it really will depend on everyone's particular situation, but some other visa categories to think about. So one is the E3 this is available for Australian nationals. It's in terms of the actual requirements, kind of the same pretty much as the H-1B in the sense that there has to be a job offer from a US employer for a specialty occupation, meaning one that requires, at least a bachelor's degree, as a minimum for entry into the occupation. And then the person has to have that related degree. So if you're eligible for the H-1B, then, you'd be eligible for the E3, but you must be an Australian national. This visa can be applied for at a consulate abroad and can be renewed, indefinitely in increments of 2 years. So it can be a really good option, potentially if you're Australian and you're not selected in the H-1B lottery. There's the TN visa. This is available for Canadian and Mexican nationals. In this case, there has to be a degree usually, and the profession has to be on a list of professions. That's part of the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement. So, for example, some of the professions, accountant, architect. There's also some limited professions on that list that require experience. So management consultant, you can qualify with either a degree or with experience. So that's also worth looking at if you're a Canadian or Mexican national. Potentially an E2 investor visa, some people who are, students, and have potential for H-1B, maybe also have, some money that they want to invest and perhaps have entrepreneurial dreams. If that's the case, the E2 is potentially worth, looking into. The E2 is for individuals who are nationals of treaty countries that want to develop and direct a company in the US. They have to be, interested in actually hiring US workers. They have to have a substantial amount of money to invest. So sometimes we see this in the context of perhaps people that can't, had a degree in their home country, perhaps had some work experience, came to the US maybe to get a master's, and now, potentially, we're interested in a job, but if they aren't selected in the lottery, might be interested in starting their own company. Similarly, if you had somebody that, had kind of already had significant success in their field, the O1 visa, the O1A or O1B for people of extraordinary ability, that can be something to consider as well. However, if somebody is just, very young, is just starting out, only awards are really as a student, often that's not going to be a viable category for them. But it's a good thing to consider for perhaps somebody who's, has significant work experience, has risen to the top of their field, perhaps went back to school to get, some additional options for them, but something to consider as well. Sometimes people will also just kind of go to the next level of their education. So perhaps they just finished their bachelor's degree and had the option for an H-1B, but weren't selected in the lottery, and perhaps they then go on to their master's. And then once they, finish their master's, they would be able to potentially get, more OPT, or depending on their field, perhaps STEM OPT, which could give up to 3 years of work authorization. As well, sometimes people will do some type of, CPT or curricular practical training, but you do want to be careful about those programs because they are very heavily scrutinized, particularly programs that offer kind of CPT on day one. So you want to be kind of careful about how you're, what you're deciding to do. But I think that if you're not selecting the lottery, there are options, but you do want to be kind of planning ahead, just knowing that that the numbers are very low for the number of H-1Bs that are available each year in the lottery. All right, so I think we've reached the end of our questions. There was one question that came to the chat. Does the sponsoring company need to have certain revenues or cash on hand? What kind of financial company information needs to be sent with the petition? So I would say, because there is this prevailing wage requirement, the company does need to, be able to meet that prevailing wage requirement. If the company is a startup, very recently started operations, then that's something where they may want to see, proof of funding, proof of capitalization. Usually on the actual form, you have to submit the company's kind of revenues, number of employees. If those are very low, they could ask for more information, such as audited financial statements, tax returns. And for startups, you would need to have kind of more information about your, if your company's been capitalized, maybe you have some venture capital funding, you would want to include that type of proof. So, generally, for most H-1B petitions, you're not submitting, bank statements of the company, but that's assuming it's a more established company with a history of employees and financials that are disclosed on the form. And if you are a newer company, you may need to be prepared to submit, bank statements and other documents showing the capitalization of the company. All right. So I think those are all the questions we had. So thank you so much, Michaela. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Bye.